Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm with Centennial Park Library and I'm going to teach you how to paint with watercolors today. So there's a few tips and tricks that will make your watercolor paintings infinitely better regardless of what you're working with. Basically, you can afford to go on the inexpensive side with brushes and paint as long as it's not dollar store paint. Go with entry-level paint, but the one thing you do not want to skimp on is paper. So make sure you get proper watercolor paper, the thick stuff, the pads of watercolor paper, the Strathmore or something like that, because it's more absorbent. And then the second thing is you want to make sure to tape it onto a board. You can use any kind of board, use masking tape, and that's going to stop your paper from warping, stop paint from pooling in the corners and stuff like that. So once we've got it set up, taped to a board, we're good to go. So I am going to use a wet on wet painting technique. First, we're going to cover the whole paper in some clean water. So I'm going to use the biggest brush that I have, and all I want to do is I just want to get it shiny, not super wet. I don't want it so wet that it's going to be running down the paper or causing paint to pool or anything like that. I just want it to be shiny. So you see that how there's a little bit of water bubbling or pooling on the corners on the tape. That's okay. That means I've got about the right amount of water, and keeping in mind that water has a tendency to run down. Normally we'd be doing watercolor sitting down at a table, not standing up at an easel, but for the sake of everybody watching at home or following along, we're going to make it nice and easy for you guys to see what I'm doing. So there we go, that's pretty good. I'm looking at it from the side here so that I can see just how wet it is, and I basically just have it a little bit glossy, just a little bit shiny, but not too shiny. So now that I've got that done, I'm going to take, I think for this one, we're gonna start, we're just gonna go with, I think, let's make our wheat field yellows and work with yellows, browns, and reds. So I'm going to start with my sun. So I've prepared some paint and some palettes beforehand, and that's the wonderful thing about watercolors. So even if you've got different kinds of watercolors. You've got the stuff that we usually see, which is the palettes like this, and then you can also get watercolor in tubes like this. So with this stuff, if you prepare it beforehand, you can mix the colors you want, you can let it dry, and then you can use this the same way that you would use these. So I like color. I like to be very exact with my color. So I've gone ahead and prepared the watercolors exactly the way that I want them. So let's see. So for my wheat field, for those of you who are not familiar with composition, the rules are thirds. So I'm going to look about a third of the way up on my painting. That's where my horizon's going to be. So I'm just kind of going to roughly mark that. I'm going to use some, this is burnt umber mixed with burnt sienna. I'm just going to kind of mark my horizon there. It's just a rough marking. We're definitely going to get more intricate with that later on. Okay, so now I want to start with my sun. So for my sun, I'm going to use a little bit of yellow ochre. I'm going to grab a little bit of this cadmium white and some of this bright yellow, and I'm going to set my sun, I'm going to set it here on the left-hand side, just about a third of the way up the painting. So I'm just going to start applying some of the paint there and going around, just kind of, the sun tends to diffuse the light around it a little bit. So very light touch, not a heavy brush, not heavy painting. And you're like, well, where did your sun go? What did you do? I'll show you one of the wonderful tricks of watercolor if you're using proper watercolors. I'm just gonna grab just a kitchen towel, I'm gonna get it slightly wet, just the corner of it, and that I'm gonna dab right there where I want my sun, the white of my sun, to shine through. And there we go. I've just kind of dabbed a white space dry on the canvas, and that's going to be my sunlight. And then from there, go back to my big brush. It doesn't have to be this big, I like bold brushes. I'm also working on a very large surface. The smaller a watercolor is, the easier it is to make it look good. So there's another little trick for you guys. So I'm planning on doing a wheat field. So I'm just kind of starting to draw some wheat stalks down in the background. They're gonna be, the sun's gonna be coming through them, so they're gonna be yellow, and we'll build on top of that. And now, aside from my yellow sun, I wanna go a little bit darker towards the horizon. So this is some burnt sienna mixed with yellow ochre. So I'm just going to kind of start drawing down the wheat texture for the horizon. I'm dabbing my brush in between different colors of paint so that I don't spread the paint around. And I want my sky to be still a little bit blue up here. And I don't like these blues, they're all too bright. So I'm going to go with a pre-mixed blue that I have here. This is ultramarine with a little bit of black mixed into it. So just grab some of that and start at the top here, drawing down my sky. And one of the tricks to watercolor is to not overdo it. Watercolor has a tendency to look very cakey, very overworked very easily. So we're going to use a light touch, very, very light touch. So working with this blue that I've mixed, and I want to work, so I'm going to just use just water, no paint on this brush now. I just wetted it down again after I applied that blue, and I want to do a little bit of a deeper blue at the top, so just getting that deeper blue. This is ultramarine mixed with black. So I'm just going to get a little bit of that in the top corner of the painting. So just kind of blend it together, just forming that sky. Just a little bit of deeper hues in the top corners. I guess I have some purple in there, that's okay. And then I'm going to add a little bit more of this lighter teal blue that I've mixed up. Now I'm going to go back to my shades of brown. So I'm going to dry off this, clean off this brush. And I think for this, I'll use some of the burnt sienna for the horizon, because sometimes the sunset gets orangey in the corners. So we're gonna just pull out that orange sunset, and then a little bit more of the yellow ochre. I don't really like the very, very bright yellows, but that's just me. If you do, that's fine. You do you. I'm doing me. And I like subdued colors. So just a little bit of water, no more paint, we've got enough paint, and I'm just gonna pull these colors in towards the sun. And we can always go reapply that dabbing technique for the sun. Just making sure that your canvas doesn't get too dry. You can always add a little bit more water, but never too much water. Okay, so we're doing a subtle sunset there. So I'm gonna reapply this dabbing technique, getting my sunspot nice and wet. And dab that sun out again. Whoops, I got a little bit of black on my tissue, but that's okay. My paper towel, that's okay. We can dab that out again, because if you're using the proper paper, then watercolor is actually very forgiving. And we're gonna do some wheat stalks in the foreground, so we can always just cover that up later on, no problem. Okay, so I'm gonna get rid of this big brush, clean it off, and dry it off. Maybe before I do, maybe I want to add a little bit of more dark blue in the corner, some of that ultramarine. Where's my ultramarine? I want to put a little bit more of this dark ultramarine in the top corner. I think the values are still a little bit too light. That's purple. So that's okay, that's not a problem. I'm gonna go to my palette, grab this ultramarine. If you make a mistake, remember Bob Ross said there are no mistakes, just happy accidents. So now I just have a more colorful sunset. So just some deeper, darker tones in the corners. Add some depth. It's in the contrast of things where the fascination lies. So folding my tissue, so I have a clean spot. I'm gonna just dab some clouds into the sky maybe. Okay, so this is a soft, cloudy, maybe this is a sunrise and not a sunset. Okay, so now I'm gonna switch to a smaller brush because I wanna go add the wheat stalks in, but there's a little bit of a line running here. I don't know if you can see it, so I'm gonna just fix that with the big brush. There we go, just a little bit of water, just soften that line up. Draw it down and across. Draw it down and across. And maybe I'll add a little bit more of that turquoisey blue in here, just to go back over. Okay. So done with my large brush. We're gonna start filling in the wheat stalks. So I'm gonna go to a smaller brush. I'm not gonna go too small for this one. This is a number 4 watercolor brush. So I'm gonna go to my number 4 watercolor. And now I'm going to my palette of browns again. So as the sun is coming through this wheat field, the wheat stalks furthest in the back, they're gonna be the lightest in color. They're going to be a little bit painted by the sunlight, and the ones that are closest to where you are, they're going to be almost pitch black. You're almost not going to see them at all. Right here in the foreground, we're going to have just silhouette. Okay, so we're going to go, I'm going to start with that yellow ochre that's the same color as the sunset. Just going to dab my brush in there. Maybe I'm going to mix it with a little bit of the burnt sienna. I'm just going to start just drawing some stalks, and be rough. Don't get obsessive about this. Don't try to make them perfect. Don't try to make them too even. Now, one thing, in front of the sun is so bright that it's actually going to make some of those stalks disappear. So the ones that are around the sun, you can kind of pull up in a straight line, but the ones that are in front of the sun, those you're going to kind of do dashes. They're going to kind of disappear in front of the sunlight and then come back up there. So there we go. That's okay. That's just the first layer. We're going to build this layer on layer on layer. Okay, so after I'm done, and I don't really have to clean my brush in between these, but when I'm done with that mix of the burnt sienna and the yellow ochre, I'm going to go to just sienna. So now I'm going to do the same thing, second row of wheat stalks. Maybe for these, we're going to do a little bit of texture at the top for some of them. So just some texture at the top, some of those heads of the wheat stalks coming out there, almost barely visible. I want them to be lighter. I think they're a little bit dark in color, so I'm gonna thin out my paint more. There we go, that's it. Because distance creates ghosts. The further away they are, the more they look like ghosts. And again, don't get too obsessive about it. We're gonna build on this layer on layer. Okay, now I want to get my brush wet again, and I want to go to this this is burnt umber and burnt sienna mixed. So I'm going to go get some of that on the brush, draw it out, draw the brush out into a point, and you can always use your tissues, always dab any extra water or paint off your brush that you don't want on there. I'm going to start again with look, that's what I want. So what's happening now is I'm painting on areas that are still a little bit wet. So the paint is spreading, but just a little bit, and that's really what I want. I wanted to create that ghost effect. They're not all the same height. Some of them are shorter, some of them are taller. You can do whatever you want. This is your wheat field. If you want all your wheat stalks to be the same height, that's okay too. So drawing some ghost pieces over here. And this one's in front of the sun, so it's just barely there. Barely there. Okay. So now I'm done with that color. I'm going to go to the even darker burnt umber, which is my darkest brown. And if you don't have all of these colors, you can always mix blacks and yellow ochres and burnt umbers or and your burnt siennas. So drawing some more. I'm going to go make one really tall up here. I'm going to make one really tall. We're getting to the foreground now, so they're closer to the viewer. I add some little visible points in here. Always, you never have to use any paint exactly the color that it is, but there's nothing wrong with it if you want to. So I'm getting taller now. This one's coming from the same stalk, and of course they're not all going to stand up perfectly straight. They're not little soldiers, they're wheat. They're blown in the wind, so they're going to be leaning, crossing over each other. So remember, nature is not regimented, doesn't care if you think that all of them need to be trimmed to the same height. You can try to tame nature, but you're probably making more trouble for yourself than it's worth. So I want to keep this very light. I'm just adding more water to my paint here. This one comes up here maybe. And do you see how there's very little control going on? I'm holding my brush far back. That allows me to be loose with my brush strokes. We're not trying to get obsessive over this. Okay, now I'm going to go to my darker color. This is actually black mixed with the burnt umber. So I'm going to go to my dark black burnt umber color, and that's going to, now we're getting into the nitty-gritty, into the foreground. So, and leave some spaces. Don't try to draw these perfectly. That's okay. Now we're getting closer to the viewer, so your stalks are going to get fatter, they're going to get longer, there's more going on. And actually, at first, before I continue any further, I'm going to take a larger brush. So this is a number 8 brush, pointy brush. I'm going to get some water on there, and I'm going to go with this dark brown color, and I'm just going to start covering this bottom space. And go back a few shades to the lighter burnt umber mixed with burnt sienna, and just start covering this bottom space. You don't have to draw it all the way down because you're going to build on top of this. So we're just gonna, because as the sun comes through this wheat field, there's not going to be a line for the horizon. It's going to be kind of spread out. So I'm going to go to my burnt umber. I'm going to make some more lines on top there, and it's okay to leave some kind of almost unfinished Some of the edges of the field are going to be glowing in the light. So it's going to look like the sun is washing out some of them. So here as we're going over the sun, remember to leave some blank space. It's almost, at this point, it almost looks like a fire, which is what we want. And I'm gonna go even darker. So remember what I said earlier, you can use this just like a palette. So I'm just re-wetting this paint and going darker, darker. Oh, there we go. You see how that paint is spreading because we're in the background here. And remember what I said about them crisscrossing too. They're not perfectly straight, so some of them are going to be at different angles. Right now we're just feathering the edge of this wheat field essentially. And you can't just suddenly have a black line here. That's just not going to look right. Now we're going to go to our black. So I'm just re-wetting my black here, and I've got a lot of dampness going on. So my paint is hopefully going to spread and make it interesting. Okay, there we go. Now I'm going to go back to this very, very big brush I used in the beginning. I'm going to get this bottom part nice and wet. This is where you won't really be able to see the definition of the wheat field anymore. So I'm going to start with a little bit of the dark black mixed with burnt umber. I'm going to throw some of this burnt umber in here. Some more black mixed with burnt umber. And I'm going to go to the black. And it's okay if you don't know the names of the colors. You can just kind of try to match them to what I've got going on, or you can use your own. If you want your wheat field to be green, make it green. Just make it different shades of green. So you really just want darker colors closer to the foreground and lighter colors further back. So really we want this whole foreground here to be almost pitch black. So just drawing it out so we don't have a sudden line. And take your time. This is meditation, right? So I need more of this black. So now I'm gonna go really get this foreground black. So I'm actually going to wet down my black and really wet it down and really get it loose. And just start, don't draw this up too high yet. So you're just going to get like a black background, and now you're going to use your brush and just tease it up, but not too high. Just tease it up in the front here. Only about, you don't want to cover all of these beautiful background layers that you just created, but you do want to get some strong foreground going. So there we go. It's just basically saving ourselves a little bit of time. Okay, that's starting to look like a wheat field, right? So now for the last layer, I'm gonna put away this brush. I'm gonna go back to my number 4. I'm gonna use some of the same black, and now I'm gonna actually start drawing some strong stalks in the front here. And again, don't try to make them perfect. Just dabbing little wheat seed textures around the tops of them. They're not starting in thin air, so draw them down. Make sure that they're not just starting from nowhere. And wheat plants tend to grow in clumps. So draw another one next to it, going in a slightly different direction. I just want to get a little bit more, my paint a little bit wetter here. So going up, using just the tip of the brush. Here we go. doesn't have to be perfect. They don't have to be perfectly straight. That's okay. I maybe don't love that it's this black, so I'm gonna go with mixing a little bit of the burnt umber in with my black. And maybe just a tad of gray. So there we go. Starting from the bottom, going all the way up. I'm gonna go over the sun here. When I get to the top, I'm just going to dab. Just dab, just dab. Leaving some space, allowing the light to shine through. You can use a thinner brush also if you want to. This one's shorter. Crossing over there. And any imperfections you accidentally create, we just use them. They're part of the scene, part of the painting. And go up here. This one's kind of short, but remember it's in front of the sun, so there's a lot of light coming through. Kind of using a drier brush here. This one's maybe crossing over out of the frame. And don't worry about the sides. They can look as messy as you want because we're going to pull this tape off and it's going to make a perfect frame. There we go. You can always go add more layers. Let's see, how do I like this so far? So I'm kind of trying to create a little bit of a composition here too. So I'm kind of framing the sun from both sides. You can do this any way you want. If you want this side of the field to be taller, or if you only want to have your wheat on one side, that's okay, only coming out of one side. Maybe there's another plant over here and it's crisscrossing. Some wheat seeds over here, wheat kernels, that's what they're called, words, names of things. Just gonna pull some up here. So this guy's really short. So is this one. And it's the best art is suggestive rather than descriptive. So leave something for the imagination to do. You don't have to fill in every little detail. So going up here. Just breathe and enjoy it. Take your time. It's a marathon, not a sprint. This is all about enjoying the act of creating. It can be very peaceful, very enjoyable. Coming up here. There's another short little one over here. Maybe for this one, all the kernels are hanging over to one side. In case you're wondering, and I know you are because people always ask me this, where my accent is from. I'm originally from South Africa. Yes, I was born there, grew up there, lived there the first 27 years of my life. And I lived in Asia for a while. Now I'm here in Florida. Okay, I think I'm happy with that composition. Maybe one more coming out from the side of the frame over here, crossing over. And I think that's good. So now, okay, so I let my painting dry, I took a walk with my dog, and I listened to one of the free ebooks that we have on our Livy app. So I'm ready now to pull the edges off of my painting and see how it looks, how the final product looks. So I'm going to grab a hold of the masking tape and pull away from the painting, never towards the painting in case it doesn't come off clean. And look at that, revealing that beautiful edge, crumpling it up, grab a hold of this. And if you don't have nails, you can always use a palette knife or just a kitchen knife. Butter knife works just as well, or scissors. Just get it started, get it going. Pulling away from the painting. It all just comes together in an instant when you pull the tape off. Pulling away, and see, that's why I pull away, because there's a little bit of top surface of the paper stuck to the tape. Okay, so all my tape is off, and there we go. Wheat fields with the sunrise behind it. Thanks for watching. This is the Zen of Painting with me, Sarah, and Pasco County Libraries.